All right, so we're going to start by creating a new document, and we're going to, I think a kind of a small poster is 24 by 36, so or actually that's probably like an average size poster. We'll go with that. So in our setup here, and then that's what I put in my size. Make sure that your units are in inches. I think sometimes when you go and you open up, even if you go to your print, if you go to print settings, it puts it to points, which is not something we've talked about too much. It's a little more precise than inches, kind of like the metric system, but we haven't really done, I don't think, too many conversions to that. So it's going to be 24 by 36. Let's call this Illustrator Shapes and Text. And then we'll do a create from there. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is the background image. All right, so we'll start from the back and move forward. If you start forward and move back, so if we started with our text, you'd have to do things with arrangement and moving things to the back, which isn't that hard to do, but I always try to start from the background and then move forward. So first thing we're going to do is go to our shape tool, which is the rectangle tool here. So it's on the left side of your toolbar. I'll select that. I'll click and drag to make a box. And right now it's white. All right. That's because right down here, and this is a little different than in Photoshop, you have a fill color and a stroke color as opposed to a background and a foreground color. So right now, to make this, if I wanted to make this a solid black, I would just double click on the white swatch here for our foreground color, and I could choose a color, and like that it fills it in with black. However, we want this to be what's called a gradient, which is when one color fades from one to another. So if you look underneath of your fill and your stroke color, you'll see this little swatch that says gradient. So if we select that, now it turns it into, this is what would be called a linear gradient, because it's kind of like you think of lines going across, making up, and if you thought, you know, this would be a white line, this would be a black line, and then you kind of filled in lines all the way across, fading from white to black, that creates your gradient. All right. So now to make this into a radial gradient, we're going to go over to our window, pull down, and select gradient, which, oh, I had mine, I just didn't see it here. So, we're going to use this palette. So if you don't see this palette, just go up to the window, pull down, and select gradient. All right. And then we're just going to change this to radial. And I think for the example, what we did is we put this, I put a couple different colors in here. And you know what? I'm going to place that image into my document so that I can see that and I don't have to keep going back and forth between screens. So Illustrator Shapes.
Did you click the super soft black?
I'm just, oh yeah, the gradient.
Oh, I got it.
All right. So this is what we're trying to create here, right? And if you guys, would that be helpful? Do you guys want the final project there to place in for reference, or we'll just keep working this way? If you did want to, you could save it from the blog, and then I just did file place. All right, one more thing before I stop and check make sure everybody's with us. So we have this radial gradient applied, all right, and then what I'll do is I'm going to go back, and these things are called sliders on the bottom. So we can move these, and as we do that, I wasn't selected. So no changes were being applied because I didn't have this shape selected. As soon as I click on this shape, and this are two tools in Illustrator, in order to do anything, I made this little poster up here, which something to remember. In order to affect it, you must select it. So if you want to make a change to something, you have to tell it, you know, think these computers are only as smart as the directions that you give them. So we're saying we want to make a change to this gradient or this shape. We have to select it first. And now I can come over here, and by moving the slider, we see that white point kind of getting brighter. All right, because there's more white in that than black. I can also click on here again and add another slider. I'll come around once I get this one last step. I'll check and see what maybe you missed. All right. And so just by double clicking this gradient or this slider, it gives me a color picker. And then if you wanted to introduce color, which I don't mind if you guys, do some different colors on this as long as you are practicing using the tools. All right. So you can choose any color in here. All right. And then, make this gradient kind of a little bit different, and you can put in a ton of sliders in here. So just by clicking the plus, if you decide, so that would create another one. If you decide you wanted to remove a slider, you just click it and drag it down, and then that removes that color. All right, I think that looks kind of cool though. You can also kind of move them around and overlap to create some different effects. I think one year you can make like an eyeball by doing this. All right. And then these little things on the top also, they kind of adjust that shift point. So this little transition, or this little diamond above the radial gradient there, that's going to adjust where that point of change happens. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is to add this texture effect. So we're going to go up to Effect and Texture and Texturizer, I think. We'll give you some different options here. So it's thinking. Now you get this window that pops up that is going to give, and I'm going to just make mine a little smaller so it fits on the screen. All right, so in the texturizer, you have basically 6 options. You have this crack allure, which you can go in there and kind of, kind of looking like, I guess, some stone. Now I don't really see this in here too much, but I'm going to try to zoom out. Sometimes you see it a little bit better when it does. All right, so actually I can see it applied. So you have this kind of rough looking effect to that. You can adjust the crack depth, the crack brightness, things like that, the spacing. So depending on what kind of look that you want, it's going to give it a look or feel to that. You have something a little more refined in this grain effect. So that's going to be a little finer detail for your grain. And then if I bump up the intensity or the contrast, you see that a little bit more. So that kind of gives you that kind of particle type effect. You also have down here your grain type. So you can do stippled, which gives you that kind of look. It kind of gets rid of your color though, but when you do that. Or clumped is there are a bunch of options here for that. So look at the details that are in there, and there's a lot of things to change often in that. Yeah, Leah? So you do have a lot of different options here. I think I went with something like the grain, or
That's what I went with.
yeah.
Ooh, green type sprinkles. Ooh, that's ooh, the colors are changing.
So we press OK. Yeah, you want to try to choose one that kind of keeps your colors in there, right?
Yeah.
So that you're not losing that work that you made on there. All right, it does take a little bit of time to apply this filter, probably because we have a large document. And remember, for vectors, it's calculating all this stuff mathematically to do that. Probably at this point, once it's done processing, I'll do a save so that we don't lose this if something does really go bad.
Not
Before I go on to text, I just want to point out, if you press and hold the rectangle, there are other shapes in there. So you have a rounded rectangle, a polygon, which with the polygon, I believe, let's see if I remember this right. Yeah. So with the polygon, you can actually make any sided shape. So what I'm doing here, and I probably should have put this into the lesson, but if you press and click and drag with the polygon tool, before you let go with your left key, if you press the up or down arrow, see how it's increasing or decreasing the amount of sides? So if you wanted to make a triangle, right, you'd go down to that. Yeah, I think there's a way through like the inspector that you can do that also, but I know that seems like that's the easier way. But let's, while we're doing shapes, let's add our stars. So press and hold your shape tool, go down to the star, and let's add some stars, which actually works the same way. So if you press the up and down arrow, you can have, I think they refer to this as a starburst. I think also, I thought if you pressed right and left, it would kind of bring it in.
Oh my god.
So if you want to do a star with more points than 5, knock yourself out. Let's keep it though as a solid color. I don't really care which color you have it, as long as you do have a solid for there. I'm going to make mine kind of like a yellow, kind of do something like a atmosphere or what am I looking for? Universe or something like that. All right, and then so 2 other things here with our star. All right, so you have to go on the bottom here, underneath to the left of where your gradient was. You just click the solid little thing there. To resize them, you can just use your selection tool, which is the black arrow, and then drag them out. All right, so we would have a star here, and then you can do a copy paste to move it and make another copy of it. You can also do, if you do Alt, left click and drag, that basically saves you the time of doing copy and paste. All right, so I'd like to see some varied shape, and then we're also, what I'm going to ask you to do is to vary the opacity and the rotation. So if you hover over the corner of the star, you get this little curvy arrow. That's going to allow you to rotate it. So I like mine to kind of be symmetrically rotated, so they're kind of maybe surrounding it or rotating. Looks like they're orbiting around. All right, so I got 4 stars here that are in different sizes. After you create them, I don't know if you can actually change the amount of points. You just have to remake it. But then the last thing with these stars, up on your ribbon here at the top, I believe that's what this is still called, you have opacity. So that is the quality of being kind of see-through or faded out. So I'd like you to have a little bit of variation in your opacity to these stars, kind of creating a little bit of kind of 3-dimensionality, I guess, or things being maybe a little faded out. All right, so now we have our background with our gradient, this texture applied to it. Let's say 4, maybe 6 stars or something in there that are filled with a color, and they have some different opacities applied. All right, so I'm going to start by making a circle. Another kind of trick for making a circle, because if you start off by just making a circle, you have to move it to align it. But there is another kind of trick, is if you hold the Alt key, it's going to make the circle starting from the center and growing it out. So that's kind of helpful if you don't like moving things around afterwards. All right, so again, I moved my cursor, and it's got these kind of smart snaps so it finds the center. So if I do Alt, that's going to start it from the center, and if I do a Shift, it's going to constrain it to a perfect circle. All right, so if I let go of Shift, then I can make an oval which starts from the center, but again, holding the Shift, it makes it a perfect circle. All right, it doesn't matter what color this is right now, because as soon as we apply the type on the path, it's going to knock it out. So I make my circle. then I'm going to press and hold the T tool, and I'm going to look for this one that says type on path. You can see here that there are a bunch of variations of type. So we're just going to talk about this one now. And then once I do that, you see that your cursor changed to this line with like a little squiggly kind of thing on it. So at that point, I want to click on my circle. All right. And as you can see here, it puts in some dummy text, that lorem ipsum stuff, right? So right now I can just do a select all, and probably what I'll do is backspace to delete it, and I'll increase my size up on the top, and I'm just going to type in there, type on path. And then we can go in there and we can change our font up here in our ribbon. It gives us a nice preview. I like choosing something in here that's a sans serif font. Does that have the feet or not? Guys, remember anything about typography? Did Mr. E talk about font classifications?
Very little. It was hard though.
Yeah. So anything like this that doesn't have the little feet, and that's whenever you hear that with categories, a serif font, and maybe I'll talk about that first here. A serif font is something like Times New Roman, or this one here, Constantina, right? If you look closely, it's got like the ends on the letters, right? So especially like the letter T. See how it has these little things that are hanging down? That's called a serif, which, anybody speak French? I don't either, but I learned that the translation of serif in French is foot. So hence the name serif font. It's got a foot. So, and sans means without. So you're learning a little French today. Sans serif means without a foot. So I think they look a little bit better in here if we do a sans serif font. Again, one without a foot. And now we're going to look at this other thing in our color options. So the front color was our fill color. The box that right now has the line through it, mean nothing is applied, is what's called our stroke color. So if we click on that and then we choose a color, now you'll see that you have this kind of slight outline to it. All right, that's your stroke, which you can increase by going up to here to your ribbon again, and you can increase that size there. Maybe I would even make this font size a little bigger, like 72. All right, so that's getting our type on the path. The last thing I'll show you before we move on, and I come around and check, is moving this text around the circle. All right, so if you guys could all look up at the screen as I do this, because this is a little tricky. All right, to move the text around the circle, or you can even put it inside, what we're going to do is first choose this white arrow, which is called the direct selection. And then if I zoom in and pan, how am I zooming in? What's the keyboard shortcut? Control plus or control minus. And panning, so you don't have to go down here and use your zoom slider. If I hold the space bar, I can then left click and pan around the document. Yeah, that is very helpful and a quick, big time saver, right?
Yeah.
So now if I go to this white arrow and I use this direct selection tool, now what you'll see, and it's probably very hard to see up on my screen there, but the cursor will change to a line with an arrow. Then I can move this around the circle, all right? And I can also drag it on the inside, I think. Oh, why is that not working?
I don't see any little dots. Oh, wait.
Oh, on this. All right, so if I want to move it to the inside, you have to move to the other side, and you have to like drag this little T on the inside of it. So now I have it kind of flipped. But I think it looks better on the outside. What you can also do is you have these squares, which, oops. So maybe we get this kind of on the top here. Just be careful if like you click the wrong way, let's see, and we double click, it'll change back to your type tool, or if you're not choosing in the right place, you get like a paragraph indicator in there. All right, but let's try to start on getting this type maybe right at the top of that circle. All right, so that was enough for that. Let's all right, to get that duplicated and kind of get this mirrored effect underneath of it, I'm going to alt click this path. All right, so I made a copy of it. And now I'm going to use this white arrow to drag the text on the inside, and then I can rotate it around. So you're looking for this little line sticking out of your path here, and that allows you to move the text from the outside to the inside. And then at that point, you use that same thing. You can just rotate it around the circle. It is a little tricky, kind of. Sometimes it doesn't quite move the way you think it's gonna. But we do that. And then we can drop the opacity on that to make it look like it's kind of faded a little bit. You can also, once you get it on the inside, if you are not comfortable with that, you can select the shape, and then you have a rotate tool. Oh no, that changes us back to that tool anyway. All right, I thought that would have been a little easier. Oh man. All right, good point to save right now. Excuse me. All right, hopefully it won't crash. So I made my text here for my title. Now to get this this arcing effect like we have here, we're going to go to Effect and then Warp. Now you have a bunch of different ones here. I think with this one I just did Arc Upper. As soon as you select one of them though, you get this pop-up window for the warp options, and it shows you what each thing does. So the arc upper only curves the top, it leaves the bottom straight, or you could do a full arc. I think it, something for a title, it looks better to do just an arc upper. And then you have a preview box to check off so you can see exactly what it's going to look like. All right, we press preview, and then you can go in there and you can see a live preview before you apply those changes of what it's going to look like. All right, so we have this arc upper. If we wanted to make this bigger afterwards, I would just go, and there's a scale tool on your free transform in your toolbar about halfway down on the right. It's like a box with an arrow. So if we wanted to just make this bigger without messing with font size, I could just go in here and do that. I can make this a little bit bigger that way, drag out my sides. I like doing that more than font size because you never really know what font size you need. This way you can just kind of get it to fit to your area. So if I zoom out here and pan, now we can see something like this. I can actually move it down as well. Alright, so we have our text here created. It's I'm going to make it nice and big so that 3D is pretty visible when we do that. And from that point, to create this 3D effect, all we have to do is go to Effect, 3D, and then Extrude and Bevel. You get a nice little pop-up window that shows up again. I always like to use the preview. And you can actually rotate this around in here and try to, a different type of orientation of your text. Make sure that you can see the extrusion. That's what that's called. All right, and we'll be talking about with the 3D printer how that works is by extruding an object, kind of like if you had a profile, like a 2D drawing, and then you pulled it up out of plastic or something. That's kind of what we call an extrusion there. So the 3D text is pretty easy, but I'm trying to give you some options, so maybe that's something you do for your title effect. That could be creating a decorative font with that. Alright, so for our drop shadow in the middle, we're just going to start by typing into a text box. We'll say drop shadow And then I'm going to make this nice and bright because our drop shadow, I guess you could make it a bright color for the drop shadow, but I don't think I want to do that. One thing too with color too, if I wanted to match the color on this, what I can do is select my fill color, and instead of double clicking to pick it kind of randomly, you have an eyedropper on here. So I can now, with this object selected, go to my eyedropper and just click on this yellow, and it automatically picks that color. And actually, I think it gave me the same stroke also. The only, yeah, it might be hidden behind the measure tool.
I found them.
Okay. Now I don't know why. Oh, I guess it matched the size too.
That's not color.
So now I'm trying to match this size and get that right. So for our drop shot, and this thing we have rotated a little bit. So if I hover over the edge, now this is kind of, there is a rotate feature, but look what it does to my text if I do that. It kind of moves it to 2 lines. So instead of just hovering and rotating, you do have a rotate tool, which now if I rotate, it keeps it kind of all in line. So that's something that's definitely, I guess, adding to what we're doing and giving you more things to remember. But if you want to keep that text in a line and rotate it, don't just hover over the edge with the selection tool, because as we're seeing, that messes it up. What you do want to do is use the rotate tool, and then you can rotate it around and it stays keeping that way. All right. And then for our drop shadow, we're going to go to Effect, Stylize, and you see there are some other options here. I just chose drop shadow because I think that's probably the most usable one. If I do my preview, again, I can see it as a live preview, and we can do, you know, you can, if you want to adjust the distance, you have that type of, I'm sorry, I did opacity. I don't know why I did that. I should be working with my offset. I wish they had sliders for this, but I guess these degrees of change, you don't want to be too dramatic. So your offset's going to change how far away it is from that. You could choose your color of your drop shadow also if you wanted to make it not be black. You know, we have, well, that still looks like it's black. Why did that not work? There we go. So, oh, I guess because I just chose it there. Yeah, so you can get a different color to your drop shadow by choosing that. So maybe if we wanted that purple or something. But I think it looks good with a black stroke on there. So there's our text with our drop shadow. I think also with that though too, it's probably going to look a little better with a slight stroke on there. Actually, I did a green one, so that's probably why I'm not seeing that. Alright, that way it gives it a little bit of an edge so that that yellow doesn't get lost into there. And I'm going to do another save at this point. I don't think I've done one in a little while. Whenever you see the asterisk after your file name on the top, it means you have not changed since your last, or you have not saved since your last change. So I'm saving. The example that I chose here, maybe, I don't know, it's kind of abstract, but maybe you want to make this compound shape, which is the combination of other shapes. So if I start by making this rounded rectangle, I can copy and paste or left click and drag.
How do you round the edges?
When you make this,
I found it.
you got it? Yeah, so basically you click and then it's your corner radius.
Yeah.
The closer you have the number to 1, the bigger, the more round it's going to be. All right, so now to join these shapes together, I'm going to select both. And then on my toolbar, I'm going to go and look for the Shape Builder tool, which is on the left side about halfway down. Once I do that, I can click and drag through, and now it makes it one big shape, which is kind of cool, I think.
How do you do that?
So again, just start with any 2 shapes, right? Right now, they're both individually selectable, right?
Yeah.
So now to join them, I'm going to Shift Select so that they're both selected. And then this Shape Builder tool over here, All right, I'm going to then left click and drag through. All right.
Shaper tool.
Yeah. What you could also do, you can see here, maybe you want to remove this part here. If I hold the Alt key, I could then remove that part in there. And it makes it one shape that has like this negative space. Oop. So, you know, there's a kind of addition and subtraction to that. And then I guess in this case, I would just group it so that it becomes one. And then I can move it around.
But how do you, I don't get the shaper thing.
So the shaper just adds or deletes things. Oop.
That's a wiki tool. The shaper tool is right here.
So if I went, like if I wanted to kind of remove this part here, I would select both, use my shape builder, and then I can do an Alt select, and it removes that part in there. So it's a really cool tool to make compound shapes out of simple ones. They used to have to do things with what was called the Pathfinder, and it was very difficult to do that, to do what we just did there. All right. The last thing with this, actually, all right. So to make this text or the image inside of a text, I'm going to start by placing the image in my document that I saved. So somewhere maybe down here, I can stretch it out using my free transform tool. All right, then I'll just place some text over it. Or actually, I think if I place text, let me see if I'm correct. Nope, all right, you can place it over it. So we're going to say this is our clipping mask. And I want to make this nice and large so that we can really see this texture inside of there. All right. At that point, all we're going to do is we're going to go back to our selection tool. We're going to select the text. We're going to select the image. Make sure that they're both selected, basically. Then do Object, Clipping Mask, and Make. And look at that. Now we have our image placed inside of our text. It will move around inside of there, so you got to be careful how you're selecting that. I'm going to just put a stroke around here so that we have some separation from the background. So see how when I move this text around, if it's kind of not where that picture was, we're not seeing it anymore. So yeah, for today, not that big of a deal, but rasterizing. So if we select File, Export, Export As, and we're going to say JPEG is our type. You do have some other options. You know what? Actually, let's try PNG. I've been having some issues with the JPEGs loading up to Google Plus and things. So yeah, and we're going to keep this as optimized. Oh. Yeah, all right, usually there's a little status thing. All right, there we go. So let's see if mine went. Yeah, here we go. All right, so there's our final result there.